quick on your heels, huh? Well then, boy, let us teach this brazen adulterer a lesson.
So is the only solution to reject civilization and return to monkey?
So it seems.
Like most borderline autistic people, I like to keep a record of everything I play. It is fun but also very revealing. I have an image of myself playing cool strategy games or comfy adventure games. But looking back, I see an endless horde of Souls-like games. Most recently Wukong. I originally started playing it with a friend, but like a deer smelling the hunter in the wind, he smelled the smell of autistic Elden Ring bosses and ran away. I should have followed him.
Bet you squeal. I bet you squeal like pig. Oh, which squeal? Squeal now. Squeal. Squeal. Squeal louder.
But more on that later. You could be fooled into thinking that this game has a story, but while there are plenty of cutscenes, they completely fail to explain the setting and tell a coherent story. I like the boar, and I like the spider women.
猪八戒. I know you find your look embarrassing. But why hide from my mother with another pig face?
Rude girl. Don't you know I'm a pious Buddhist? Give me your mother's name, and I'll check my list.
But besides that, you are not going to get anything out of it unless you are familiar with the source material. The game looks alright, but the frame rate is all over the place. Sometimes it runs fine, but then it drops to the 20s. On some bosses I lowered the settings to the lowest, but I still had frame rate issues. Thank God I future-proofed my GPU by buying an expensive one. Totally not a worthless scammerino. And the frame rate is important, as the gameplay is the usual iframe based dodge combat. The combat is overall competent and have some cool ideas in terms of magic. The magic stands out as it feels like it is actually integrated properly with the combat. You don't have to spec some bullshit build to use them, and you can use them against bosses without feeling like you are cheating. A go-to cope for Dark Souls games is that people who whine about the difficulty should just use summons or OP builds.
Wowie zowie, that was hard, damn.
Overpowered builds are out of the question if you are not following a guide, and while the resistance to using summons might be explained by gamer pride, I think we can all see that the boss's AI and moveset doesn't work against two enemies. It's like beating an enemy in Oblivion by jumping up on a rock and shooting arrows at it. You are not cheating, but you are also not playing the game the way it is intended. Anyway, the point is that this is not Wukong's magic. It's cool, it's integrated, and it sets the game apart. However, while the magic is cool, there are only a couple of spells, and the combat in general lacks variety. While you can spec differently and focus on 3 different stances, it's all fast-paced stave combat in the end. It grows old long before the end of the game, and the level design makes it worse. The level design is in general poor. The game manages to both have boring linear levels and pointlessly large levels at the same time. One thing that they share is an abundance of trash mobs and boring encounters. It feels like a kid with the Warcraft 3 editor has copy-pasted the same boring mob all over the place without any rhyme or reason. It feels like padding at times, and the snow area especially was just awful. There are some alright areas, of course, but they are okay at best, and combined with boring loot and invisible walls all over the place, it's a somewhat underwhelming experience. Then we have the bosses, which are both good and bad. There is a massive amount of bosses in this game, and at times it feels like you go from one boss to the next. What I like about this game is that for the most part, the bosses have a reasonable difficulty. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries and sometimes you won't try them, but most normal bosses never became frustrating to me. A friend watched me play against a couple of bosses, and he said that it felt like an intuitive fight, and that it was cool that I could sometimes man-mode them. You might ask, what the fuck does that mean? Well, in many Souls-like, the bosses hits so hard and are so hard to stagger that you kind of have to dance around them and then get in one hit when their combo is done. In Wukong, you can often stagger bosses and have enough health to take some hits, so you feel more like a fighter and less like a mosquito. When it comes to being intuitive, it's all about being able to trust your eyes and instinct. That may sound like vague nonsense, but basically, when you see a moveset for the first time, you are able to understand how it will play out based on the momentum and animations then you get a naturally flowing combat. The easiest way a developer can make the combat hard is after all to just fuck with that instinct by playing around with physics, speed ups and shockwaves.
Nothing to see here, please disperse. Nothing to see here, please.
Wukong certainly have this shit. I hope you enjoy tracing jump attacks. But for most bosses, I felt like Wukong either kept that to a reasonable level or gave you enough health to handle it. Now that is for most bosses. There are certainly some bad ones. I recently made fun of Elden Ring and their ADHD bosses, but honestly Wukong is just as bad at times. I feel like an old man at a rave party. It's loud, flashy, I am tired and I don't understand what is going on. These bosses often have an absurd amount of health. Their attacks hurts like hell. They have multiple phases and crazy combos with the usual slowdowns, speed ups and shockwave attacks. It was awful and I came close to dropping the game multiple times. Now, even at its worst, I don't think Wukong is as bad as some of the bosses in Elden Ring, but that doesn't mean that it is good. Some of these fights are really long and worse, have a trivial first phase that is just wasting your time. Another annoying thing is that the combat in Wukong often relies on you getting in these heavy attacks with long animations. Take a guess how that works when the boss is teleporting around like crazy. So these bosses were awful, and the linear nature of Wukong makes it worse. In a game like Dark Souls 2, when I met an annoying boss, I could say fuck it and go on a different path and come back when I was stronger. This is not the case for Wukong, and you just have to push through. With all of this being said, there were one boss that I fought with a friend watching, and after 2 long phases we realized that the boss was not over, and we said no fucking way that they will force me to replay the entire boss fight if I die now. Guess what? I died. But there was a checkpoint and I didn't have to replay it. So with all of its nonsense, the developers have some feeling of fairness at least, and it is not as bad as Elden Ring. All in all, I found Wukong to be a decent if limited Souls-like. The rumors that Wukong is something new or exciting is greatly exaggerated. Still, an overhyped game is not a bad game, and if you want another Souls-like, then Wukong will most likely scratch that itch.